Welcome to the fifth and final chapter of Nick Carter's keynote address at UU University 2008. In the last chapter, Nick spoke about the other. And now Nick concludes his presentation by talking about how to be together in a way that surpasses mere community.
Okay, we're turning the corner here. Juntos, together. We talked about getting our own act together, focusing on ourselves, nosotros. And we've talked about turning our attention to others, ellos or ellas. Now, juntos, together. The first concept that I want to share with you is a concept called communitas. In contrast to community, which emphasizes proximity, communitas emphasizes our common bond. For the church, this is really our ultimate goal. When we recognize that we are not known outside of our relationships. We are not in our churches to earn a living or to get ahead, but to delight in the relationship of the people who sojourn with us. Relationships and things inside the church are different, or at least they should be. Relationships are different because there's a bond that we share. If there is no bond, if there is no genuine sharing, then we have very little to offer as a church, and the church should drop the pretense of being a transformative institution. Those of you who know St. Paul's writings know that this is his constant theme. And I think we need to focus on this concept of communitas. I think it is where our collective conscience is formed. I met Martin once. I was only a teenager, but the encounter with America's greatest civil rights leader, and by the way, Baptist minister, left such a great mark on me that it is probably the single greatest reason why I entered the ministry. We talked of many things. And at one point I asked him, what is it, you're so eloquent, how do you find time to prepare for all of these masterful sermons that you preach? And he said, I've been preparing my whole life for this moment. Right? That those words are not written overnight. Those words were written over 20 years. It was things like that really took me. By the way, I ended up going to the same school that Martin Luther King did. And one of the great moments is when I was a senior, I got into the archives and I was able to get a hold of his transcripts and some of his papers. Do you know that Martin Luther King got a C+ in public speaking? How'd you like to be that professor? Oops. I was deeply moved by how much Martin's faith shaped him and compelled him into the choices that he made for his life. And I think too many people forget that. Martin spent his entire life focused on what he called the beloved community. It was his vision for that part of the kingdom of God that we can know and participate in now. It was a place where love was made manifest through the presence of justice. It was a place where things that separate us and hurt us were overcome. The beloved community was the true and full sense of communion, and every ounce of his being was dedicated to trying to usher in that reality. It was one that led him to places that he had not planned, and to do things that were not on his agenda. But he was compelled from his faith. Now, there is a spiritual connection between people in communitas that does not exist in simple communities. Shared geography, trash collection, and taxes can make for commonality, but not for bonding. That's the difference between community and communitas. There is a bond that exists amongst the people in communitas. That word comes from medieval English of banding, And bonding now, of course, is a very hip, although badly abused term from the 1970s, male bonding, parent bonding, and that sort of thing. And it was a way of trying to describe close personal relationships that we have with each other. It was good chemistry, bonding. Right? You know, I think churches regularly overlook this idea of bonding, that they're so concerned with numbers and quantifiable measures of success that they miss the biggest point of all, that maybe success is the wrong goal. Maybe what churches are called to be is healthy and joyful and faithful rather than big. In the discipline of social psychology, there's a concept called the Dunbar number, which is the cognitive limit of the number of relationships that any one individual can sustain. And while the number itself isn't fixed, most believe it's between 200 and 300. Those churches who have built and sustained their bond have a huge asset. And those who talk positively about their churches, who celebrate their churches, often they have different language, but they're really talking about the bond. That is one of the things that draws them and keeps them as members of their church. Pundits far and wide would say that the country is experiencing skyrocketing interest in spirituality, and everyone is talking about it and signing up for study groups and book clubs and going on retreats and that are all focused on spirituality, and it's really quite exciting. And we see a lot of students that arrive at seminary talking about their spirituality. But as I have questioned these people, there's something a little unsettling for me that I find in their professions. And this is not across the board. I think there are some people who have really offered us some great stuff. There are some spiritual guides and some people who are doing some marvelous, marvelous work. And it is a great frontier for us. But I want to just raise one small caution, that there is a nature, a side to spirituality that is very narcissistic. It's very self-centered. It's all personal. And I guess for me, true spirituality must include the phrase, so that, or so what. It goes back to the question of a garden variety of faith, right? Or the statement that I said early when I began. We're interested in getting our act together so that we can give ourselves away in ways that matter, right? Spirituality that's disconnected to the community, to the communitas, runs this risk. I think it plays an important part of getting our act together, but there must be a so that. For me, communitas is a question of discovering the soul of an institution. With that, I want to add one other thing about this communitas. Of all the border crossing skills, the one that I think that we overlook is our ability to play with each other. And I want to be serious about play. Other than worshiping together, the greatest single way to build an inclusive bond and overcome differences is through play. I want us to play with each other. When we play together, we allow ourselves to imagine other worlds, and we are changing roles constantly. Some of us get too old and too stuffy, and we've lost our sense of play. But if you have, watch children. Watch what happens, how they can change a role, and okay, you be this and I'll be that, and it's a wonderful thing that happens. When we play together, we imagine other worlds, and we cross borders of difference and join in a world of extreme equality. Now, as adults, we tend to look down on play and see it as something that kids do. It's immature behavior, we say. Then, too, many of us are terrified of being being made to look foolish, to which I want to say, too late. All right, we're on a roll here. Redemption. Now, redemption, I know, is not a word that you use very much, and there are probably some of you that are beginning to break out in hives. It's like, I told you, if you let that Baptist come, sooner or later he's going to go for the clothes. And here I am, been very good, patient, and all that sort of stuff. And now here it is, here's this word. Well, I'm not talking about personal redemption here. But I'm talking about institutions. And I'm interested in seeing us attack our assumptions about our institution. If our faith brings us anything, it ought to bring us a different perspective on how we do business. But far too often it doesn't. In too many cases, our churches are organized and run just like the society and the culture that we are a part of. And I really want to encourage us to look again at our assumptions about the institutions that we are a part of. We don't think about this a lot. And we have generic notions about democratic process and how organizations ought to be put together. But they're often built on a house of cards. I'm really concerned at the school about what I call a hidden curriculum. And I think church people ought to be attentive to this too. We have classes, and we have some of the finest scholars in the world who teach on theology and Bible and ethics and social justice and all those sorts of things. And we present a lot of very progressive ideas about equality and the elimination of hierarchy and a new vision of God's kingdom. And then the students walk out of the classroom and encounter the school and the way the school works. All they have to do is walk over and try and pay their bill. And when they do, they encounter the most hierarchical, uncaring institution, and they get their second lesson. They get the lesson from the hidden curriculum that says, when it comes to running our institution, we don't really believe all that stuff. Right? And I think all of us need to spend a little time looking at the hidden curriculum of the distance between the way our institutions function and what we profess to believe. And we have to keep asking ourselves about what internal systems are at work or fail to work. How does our church handle conflict? What's the real message of hospitality that we convey to strangers? How permeable or accessible is our church community to others? What is the story that our church is telling? The collective story that our church is telling, right? This is, people in business will say, this is the question of branding. The ultimate challenge for brand, the definition of a brand, what is your brand? What is the unique and compelling proposition that you offer to the world? That's it. All right. I think it's a good question that churches ought to ask themselves. What is the unique and compelling proposition that we offer to the world? More often than not, when they get through the process, they have the most generic of statement. It has wonderful, platitudinous words, but it has nothing that says it's unique and compelling about why somebody should be a member of this church. I talk about the redemption of institutions. This is critical for leading institutional change. We often see our institutions as evil or at best amoral entities. And we don't really have, most of us in the world of religion have theologies, but all of our theologies relate to persons. And we get pretty flummoxed if somebody asks us, well, do you have a theology of institutions? Why would we have that? Why would we worry about our faith in relationship to institutions? But what we're missing is that institutions are created. And if they're created, then, in my language, they can be fallen. And if they're fallen, they can be redeemed. You can put your own words if you don't like that kind of language. But we don't think about training people how to transform institutions. We talk about transforming people's lives, but we don't nurture the skills about transforming institutions. And I think we need to be developing those skills and realizing that transforming institutions is an essential part of our work in border crossing. I think there are things that we can do often, and this is the last point on this, is churches, when it comes to solving problems, everybody gets together, and there are several things that we do. One is that we have problems, and we take all of our best people and a good portion of our money, and we try and put it on a problem to solve it. Right? It's a liability-oriented approach to solving problems. It says we have a problem, it's kind of like a doctor. We have to come in and do surgery to fix it. What we forget is that we're neglecting the assets. That we're taking our best people and our money and putting them on the negative things, and in the process we're neglecting the assets. It's been my experience in my institution that if I take my best people and my money and put them to work on the assets grow at a geometric rate, and the liabilities get smaller and the institution gets stronger in dealing with those liabilities. I'm going to close leaving the church, coming to the issue of shalom, as this is the Hebrew word meaning peace, but it has a larger meaning that often gets overlooked. Shalom also means wholeness, completeness, healing, well-being, and safety. It says, shalom says that nothing is missing, nothing is broken. It's used to say hello and goodbye, and it can refer to peace between two entities, or to the well-being and welfare or safety of individual and groups. It is the equivalent of the Arabic salam. Ministry in the Borderlands must have shalom as its reference and its measure in all things. I know that there are many here who work for peace. This is one of the wonderful things about the UU movement. For them, peace it's not a goal, it's a way of life. For instance, to a person, they rarely enter an encounter with another person, a stranger, assuming hostility. More of us need to learn how to do that. That we project into the emptiness, into the silence, and we begin to assume hostility, and there's no reason for us to assume hostility. Right? The orientation of their minds is towards a peaceful encounter. And should they enter a situation in which hostility happens to be present, they'll do everything in their power to disarm it. Their goal is to disarm, and their methods are disarming. They don't judge, and they look, as Bill Singford said, they look to be surprised by the happiness that they will find, the exception, that rather than the stereotype of the mean corporate person who doesn't care about the little people, to be surprised about the one who does, to be surprised about the soldier who cares about peace, to be surprised about those who've thought imaginatively about things that we don't give them credit for imagining. Peace, people who live a life of peace are open to this and expect it. They go searching for it. They're curious to find those peaceful examples. I know that we aren't very good at celebrating the gift of these people, and I think we should appreciate them far more than we do. Think about some of the people that you know who embody peace. And here's what I want to say to finish with all of you. In the work that I do, I have a unique privilege. People come to seminary from all walks of life. We have Catholics and Baptists and Congregationalists and Presbyterians and Methodists and Unitarians and Quakers and all kinds of folks. We have people who come from big churches and small churches, We have people who come, who are young and people who are old. We just gave a degree to a woman who's 77 years old, who finished her Master of Divinity degree. She's fired up to do her ministry. Remarkable people, all of whom have somewhere heard a call to a life of service. And they come with an enormous sense of inadequacy. They're never really quite sure if they've got the stuff that's required of them. And I can see it in their eyes and hear it in their voices. And so I ask myself, why in the world would anybody in this day and age want to do that? Why? There is only one reason. And that is because their faith has called them to envision a better world, a better place, and that somehow they have been called to do that. And what I want to say to those of you, when I realize that most of you, the vast majority of you, are not clergy, and that this is not a profession that you're particularly called to, but you've joined a church. There's something that compelled you, that drew you together. Some bond, some communitas that you share, some insight. Right? There is a way in which, you see, we're all like those seminarians. Those people who've heard a call. It may not be that we've chosen that professional track. It may be that we go to work 9 to 5 at a factory every day or in some office building. But nonetheless, we're called. We're called. Right? And there is a chance for us to make a difference. I have shared with you what I think is the significant challenge of our time. And if you'd agree, I would invite you to explore the depths of your own faith, whatever it is, and see what resonates with you. See what deep spirit calls deep unto deep for you. You can be one of those people. You can be one of those people who can make all the difference in the world. You can be a person who can cross borders of difference. You can repair the breach. You can repair the breach with another person. You can repair the breach in your church. You can repair the breach in your community. You can be a part and team together with others who can fight to repair the breach in our society and our world. It is possible. It is possible. That's the gift of faith. That is the gift. It's transforming. And I invite you, and I say to you, go ahead. You can do it. You can do it. You know? You really can. And the world will be a better place for it. Heal the breach. Heal the breach. Be border crossers. Thank you.
This wraps up Nick Carter's keynote presentation, and we now have our final 3 discussion questions. Spend about 10 minutes discussing each one. The first is, how would your congregation be different if it were a redeemed institution? Press play to move on to the next question.